The Gloucester Meteor 3947, built across 17 variants, entering operational service with 616 Squadron on July 27, 1944, was the only Allied jet fighter to fly combat operations in World War II, and the aircraft that gave Britain its first operational experience with turbojet-powered interceptors, while the Luftwaffe was simultaneously fielding the Messerschmitt Me 2-62. The Meteor F-1 was kept from the continent intentionally. The Air Ministry feared German capture and reverse engineering of the Whittlejet engine, and spent its operational debut intercepting V-1 flying bombs over southern England. 13 V-1s destroyed before the war ended. The F-8 variant, the definitive day fighter, reached 965 kilometers per hour in level flight and equipped the bulk of RAF fighter command through the late 1940s and into the early 1950s. Australia's Royal Australian Air Force deployed F-8 Meteors to Korea in 1951, where they entered combat against MiG-15S, with results that established both the limits of the type and the risks of committing second-generation jets against the swept-wing contemporaries they were never designed to fight. 5 MiG-15S were credited to RAAF pilots. 32 Meteors were lost, primarily to MiG guns. The kill ratio was unfavorable in every analysis. The NF-11 through NF-14 night fighter variants, equipped with AI Mark 10 radar in an extended nose, served RAF night fighter squadrons into the late 1950s alongside the more capable Venom and Javelin. The Meteor's legacy was the foundational knowledge of jet operations that every subsequent British fighter built upon. It was obsolescent before it peaked. It was essential anyway. The de Havilland Vampire 3268, built worldwide, entering RAF service in April 1946, achieved several firsts that shaped global jet aviation. On December 3, 1945, Lieutenant Commander Eric Brown landed an experimental Vampire on the deck of HMS Ocean, becoming the first pilot to land a jet aircraft on an aircraft carrier. The test demonstrated that carrier jet operations were possible in principle, even if the Vampire's limited engine power and long landing run made it impractical for fleet service without catapult assistance. The FB-5 fighter bomber, the primary production variant, combined 4 20mm cannon with capacity for 908 kilograms of bombs or rockets, establishing the multi-role fighter bomber concept that would define British tactical aircraft through the 1950s and 1960s. The twin-boom pusher configuration, engine buried in the fuselage pod with tail surfaces carried on twin booms, was a radical visual departure from contemporary designs, but provided a short jet pipe that minimized thrust losses in the Goblin's relatively modest power output. The Vampire equipped RAF frontline squadrons in Germany, the Middle East, and the Far East through the late 1940s and early 1950s, seeing combat in Malaya, where FB-9 aircraft conducted ground attack operations against communist insurgents. Its export success, 31 nations operated the type, made it Britain's most internationally influential first-generation jet fighter, establishing the commercial relationships in defence exports that Hawker's Hunter would develop into a major industrial programme. The de Havilland Venom 1430 built, entering service in August 1952 as a direct development of the Vampire, with a Ghost engine producing 43% more thrust, bridged the gap between Britain's first-generation jets and the swept-wing designs of the mid-1950s. The thinner wing section and increased power pushed maximum speed to Mach 0.85, placing it in the transonic range, where compressibility effects began to affect handling, providing operational experience in a speed regime that the subsequent Hunter and Swift would explore more deeply. In the Suez Crisis of November 1956, Sea Venom FAW-21s from HMS Albion, Bulwark, and Eagle conducted strikes against Egyptian airfields, destroying aircraft on the ground and hitting radar installations. 7 Egyptian aircraft were destroyed. The operation was cut short by American diplomatic pressure that halted the campaign before its objectives were achieved, not through military failure but through political intervention. The Sea Venoms had done their job. The job was then cancelled around them. The NF-2 and NF-3 night fighter variants replaced the Meteor NF series in the all-weather interception role, serving with RAF squadrons until the Javelin's introduction in 1960. The NF-3's AI Mark 21 radar gave it genuine all-weather search and track capability against subsonic targets, the requirement that defined RAF night fighter operations through the early Cold War years when Soviet bombers were the primary threat and weather over the North Sea was a constant adversary. The Hawker Seahawk, 541 built, entering Fleet Air Arms Service in 1953, was the Royal Navy's primary carrier-based jet during the Suez operation and the aircraft that demonstrated Britain's carrier strike capability immediately before that capability was politically curtailed. The Seahawk's bifurcated jet exhaust, the intake split to pass air through the wing route, exhausting through 2 outlets on either side of the tail, was an unusual engineering solution that lowered the centre of gravity and improved carrier deck handling, but added manufacturing complexity for marginal aerodynamic benefit. FGA-6 Seahawks from HMS Eagle Albion and Bulwark flew 89 attack sorties in the 8 days of Operation Musketeer's air campaign against Egypt in November 1956, targeting Egyptian Air Force bases at Abu Sueya, Luxor, and Cairo West. The operation destroyed substantial numbers of Egyptian aircraft on the ground, while Seahawks suffered no losses to Egyptian air defense. The campaign demonstrated that well-executed carrier strikes could achieve air superiority over a defended target area, precisely when American political pressure terminated it. The Seahawk's service with the Royal Navy ended in 1960, replaced by the de Havilland Sea Vixen for the all-weather interception role. Germany and India operated Seahawks into the 1970s and 1983, respectively, the Indian Seahawks from INS Vikrant, conducting attacks on Pakistani targets in the 1971 Bangladesh War, including the mining of Chittagong Harbour. Britain had retired the aircraft that would subsequently fight one of the more consequential naval air campaigns of the Cold War era. The Supermarine Swift, 197 built, entering RAF service in February 1954 as the first swept-wing aircraft to equip a frontline RAF squadron, became one of the most operationally damaging procurement decisions in British aviation history before the TSR-2 cancellation. The F1 and F2 marks suffered from a pitch-up instability at transonic speeds that made them dangerous at the altitudes and speeds they were intended to operate. Above Mach 0.9, the Swift could enter an uncontrollable nose-up pitch that pilots could not correct before the aircraft departed controlled flight. Several pilots died before the problem was fully characterized. The F1 and F2 were grounded in 1955, less than a year after entry to service. The F3 and F4 were cancelled before production, only the FR-5 photo reconnaissance variant, operating at lower altitudes in a different performance envelope that avoided the problematic transonic regime, achieved sustained operational usefulness in Germany through the late 1950s. The F-7 ground attack prototype demonstrated that the basic airframe, when not asked to operate as a pure fighter, could perform adequately. Being adequate at lower altitudes in a less demanding role was not what Supermarine had promised the RAF. The Swift's failure handed the Hunter a clear field as Britain's primary swept-wing fighter, and effectively ended Supermarine's independent fighter development. The company merged into BAC in 1960, with the Swift's failure as context. The aircraft that had built the Spitfire produced the Swift. The contrast was not discussable in certain circles. It is relevant in this one. The Hawker Hunter, 1,972 built, entering RAF service in July 1954, was the aircraft that gave Britain's post-war aviation industry its primary commercial success and gave the RAF its first truly effective swept-wing day fighter. On September 7, 1953, squadron leader Neville Duke set an absolute world speed record of 1,171 kilometers per hour in a prototype Hunter, a moment of national aviation pride that the Swift's concurrent failures had made urgently necessary. The record was largely symbolic. What mattered operationally was that the Hunter could sustain combat maneuvering at high subsonic speeds without the pitch-up instability that had grounded the Swift. The FGA-9 fighter ground attack variant, developed for the Near East and Far East Air Forces, carried 4 30mm Arden cannon, plus 3,630 kilograms of rockets, bombs and fuel, giving it genuine versatility in the counterinsurgency and conventional strike roles that the RAF would use throughout the 1960s in Aden, Borneo and Kuwait. The Hunter's contribution to the Aden emergency from 1963 to 1967 included low-level strafing and rocket attacks against dissident tribesmen in conditions that demonstrated the aircraft's robustness in harsh operating environments. 21 nations operated the Hunter, with combat use continuing through the 1991 Lebanese Civil War. Lebanon's Hunters flying combat missions 37 years after the type's RAF introduction. Abu Dhabi's Hunters fired the opening shots of the 1971 India-Pakistan War. Chile's last Hunters were retired in 1995. The aircraft that was supposed to be an interim type until supersonic fighters arrived became the defining British jet fighter of its generation through sheer capability and endurance. The Gloucester Javelin 436, built across 9 marks, entering RAF service in February 1956, was the world's first purpose-designed twin-jet all-weather delta-wing fighter, an aircraft that addressed the specific requirement for an interceptor capable of finding and engaging Soviet bombers in all conditions over the North Sea and Northern Europe. Its broad delta wing gave the Javelin a characteristic profile that RAF pilots called the Flying Flatiron, not affectionately, because the delta planform at subsonic speeds produced handling characteristics that required significantly more pilot adaptation than the Hunter's more conventional wing. The FAW.9, the definitive mark, carried 4 Firestreak infrared-guided missiles as its primary armament alongside 4 30mm cannon, the first RAF interceptor to carry both gun and missile armament in a fully integrated weapons system. The AI Mark 17 fire control radar provided search and track capability against targets at night and in cloud, giving the Javelin genuine all-weather interception capability that the Meteor NF series had only partially achieved. The Javelin's development span of 9 marks over 8 years of production reflected the difficulty of developing all-weather interception technology in parallel with building the aircraft to carry it, a serial iterative improvement process in which each mark addressed deficiencies identified in the previous one. The FAW.9 was substantially more capable than the FAW.1. They shared an airframe and little else. The last Javelins were retired in 1968, replaced by the Lightning and McDonnell Phantom in their respective single-seat and two-seat roles. The de Havilland Sea Vixen, 145 built, entering Fleet Air Arms service in July 1959, was the last purpose-designed British carrier-based jet fighter, a two-seat all-weather interceptor that gave the Royal Navy genuine beyond visual range interception capability and infrared-guided missile armament for the first time. The unusual offset cockpit, pilot to port, observer buried in the starboard fuselage without external windows, maximized the radar observer's working environment while making the observer's situation profoundly claustrophobic and operationally isolating. Observers who ejected faced different trajectory and speed conditions than the pilot, an asymmetry that carrier deck accidents made uncomfortably relevant. The FAW-2, introduced in 1963 with red-top missiles replacing fire streaks, provided a longer-range, more capable seeker that gave the Sea Vixen an effective engagement envelope against contemporary Soviet maritime patrol aircraft. Red Top's first combat use came during operations off Aden in 1964, where Sea Vixens from HMS Centaur provided air defense cover for ground operations against Yemeni dissidents, an operational context that demonstrated that air defense capability could not be separated from strike capability in carrier air-wing planning, as the same aircraft needed to perform both functions when the carrier operated independently. The Sea Vixen was replaced by the McDonnell Phantom FG-1 from 1969, a replacement that reflected the Royal Navy's recognition that it needed an aircraft with supersonic performance, greater payload, and longer range than the Sea Vixen could provide. That the replacement was an American design rather than a British one reflected the cancellation of the P1154 and the TSR-2 that had consumed the indigenous supersonic development funding. The English Electric Lightning, 338 built, entering RAF service with 74 Squadron on June 29, 1960, was the fastest British aircraft ever built, the only entirely British Mark II fighter ever to enter service, and the last purely British fighter designed to fly in RAF frontline service. Its twin Rolls-Royce Avon engines were stacked vertically in the fuselage, a configuration that no other production aircraft in history had used, providing a thrust-to-weight ratio that gave it the ability to climb from brake release to 15,240 meters in 2 minutes and 30 seconds. It could sustain Mach 2.27 in level flight. No aircraft that the Soviet Union was likely to send over Britain in 1960 could catch it after it was airborne. The Lightning's limitations were the direct consequence of its extraordinary performance characteristics. The fuel fraction, the proportion of total weight devoted to fuel, was too low for the power the engines demanded, limiting combat radius to approximately 370 kilometers without overload tanks. The weapons load was similarly constrained, 2 red-top missiles and 2 Aden cannon, because the high-performance airframe left no volume for conventional weapon bays. An interceptor of extraordinary capability and minimal persistence. It could sprint to any threat within its radius and destroy it. It could not loiter. The F-6, the definitive mark, addressed endurance with overwing fuel tanks and a ventral pack that extended combat time, but visually transformed the elegant original design into something more purposeful than beautiful. Lightnings served with the RAF until 1988, 28 years from entry to service, and with the Royal Saudi Air Force into the 1980s. Saudi Lightnings flew intercepts against Iranian aircraft during the Iran-Iraq War. The aircraft that was designed to intercept Soviet bombers over Britain spent its twilight years over the Persian Gulf. Geography is irrelevant to performance specifications. The Hawker Siddeley P1154, cancelled April 6, 1965, £50 million spent, was the aircraft that would have made Britain the only nation capable of deploying a Mach 2 vertical takeoff fighter, a capability that no other country possessed in 1965 and that no country has possessed since. The Bristol Siddeley BS 100 engines plenum chamber burning system, after burning in the vectored jet streams rather than in a conventional jet pipe, would have given supersonic thrust in the vertical lift regime that the subsonic Pegasus engine in the Harrier could never approach. The P1154's cancellation was driven by three intersecting forces: NATO pressure against a design that was specifically British rather than collaborative, Royal Navy insistence on two engines for carrier safety that the single-engine P1154 could not satisfy, and Dennis Healy's defence review cost calculations that showed an American F-4 Phantom in both RAF and RN service would be cheaper than developing two separate variants of the P1154. All three arguments were technically defensible. None addressed the strategic consequence. Cancelling the world's only Mach 2 V/STOL fighter terminated the BS-100 engine program simultaneously, eliminating the propulsion technology that would have made a second-generation supersonic Harrier possible in the 1970s. The F-4 Phantom that replaced it was a better aircraft in most conventional performance measures. It could not operate from unprepared forward strips. It needed a 2,600-metre runway. The P1154 needed 100 metres. The operational flexibility that the difference represented was the entire point. It was cancelled anyway. The McDonnell Phantom FGR-2, entering RAF service in August 1969, the RN's FG-1 from 1969, was the aircraft that the P1154's cancellation necessitated, an American design adapted for British use by fitting Rolls-Royce Spey bypass turbofans in place of the original General Electric J79 turbojets. The modification required widening the fuselage to accommodate the Spey's larger diameter and produced a characteristic bulged appearance that distinguished British Phantoms visually from every other variant. The Spey's higher bypass ratio gave superior fuel economy and thrust at low altitude, specifically the North Sea and Central European environments where RAF Phantoms would spend most of their operational lives. The adaptation also introduced a specific problem. The wider fuselage disturbed airflow to the engines above 40,000 feet, reducing high-altitude performance below the American J79 powered variant's capability. A Phantom that was better at low altitude and worse at altitude than the aircraft it was adapted from, a consequence of prioritizing British engine content over unmodified performance. The political decision to use British engines rather than American ones produced a different aircraft from either the original design or what the P1154 would have been. FGR-2S flew combat air patrols over the South Atlantic during the Falklands War in 1982, operating from Ascension Island and forward deploying to Stanley after its capture. Their contribution was defensive, providing air cover against potential Argentine long-range strikes rather than offensive. The aircraft that Britain had bought to replace the P-1154 defended the islands that the P-1154 might have been deployed from. The Hawker Siddeley Harrier 824, built across all variants for all operators, entering RAF service on April 1, 1969, vindicated the vertical takeoff concept that the P-1154's cancellation had appeared to terminate, demonstrated in the Falklands War the combat value of genuine V/S TOL capability in an expeditionary context, and exported to the United States Marine Corps, which adopted it as its primary close air support aircraft, because no American design could match its short-field performance. Britain had built the aircraft that America's Marines preferred over American alternatives. The Sea Harrier FRS.1 entered service with the Fleet Air Arm in April 1980, providing carrier-based air defence and strike capability that the Royal Navy had lacked since the withdrawal of the Phantom. In the Falklands War of April to June 1982, Sea Harriers from HMS Hermes and HMS Invincible achieved 20 confirmed kills against Argentine combat aircraft, Mirages, Daggers, Skyhawks, Canberras and a Learjet, without a single Sea Harrier lost in air-to-air combat. The aircraft that had been described as a subsonic compromise incapable of serious fighter work killed everything it was pointed at. The GR-7 and GR-9 variants, jointly developed with Boeing and incorporating American avionics and weapons, served in Bosnia, Kosovo, Afghanistan and Iraq before their controversial retirement in 2010 as part of the Strategic Defense Review cuts. The retirement simultaneously eliminated RAF and RN fixed-wing carrier aviation capability, grounding the Ark Royal and Illustrious alongside the aircraft they carried. The aircraft that had won the Falklands was scrapped to fund other priorities. The Falkland Islands still require defence. The Panavia Tornado F3, 165 built, entering RAF service in November 1986 as the air defence variant replacing the Phantom and Lightning, was an interceptor stretched from a strike aircraft airframe, a compromise visible in every operational assessment and one that the RAF accepted because the Eurofighter Typhoon that would have replaced it was running a decade behind schedule. The swing-wing variable geometry configuration optimized for the Tornado GR1's low-level strike roll gave the F3 acceptable supersonic performance at altitude, but made it heavier, less agile, and less efficient in the pure fighter role than the purpose-designed interceptors it was meant to replace. The GEC Marconi AI-24 Foxhunter radar, designed to give the F-3 a genuine look-down/shoot-down capability against Soviet bombers at long range, entered service in a state so incomplete that the aircraft flew with concrete ballast in place of the radar for the first 4 years of service life, 1986 to 1990, while the radar's development problems were resolved. The Tornado F2 Mark entered service with non-functioning radar. An air defense interceptor without functional radar is a fast, expensive aircraft that cannot intercept anything beyond visual range. The F-3 performed creditably in Gulf War air defense patrols in 1991, the radar by then functioning, and flew combat air patrols in Kosovo and the Falklands replacement cycle. Saudi Arabia's Tornado ADV, acquired in 1989, flew intercepts against Iranian aircraft during the Gulf War. The last RAFF-3As were retired in 2011, replaced by the Typhoon FGR-4 in the air defense role. The aircraft that was always a compromise ended its service as exactly that. The Eurofighter Typhoon, entering RAF service on June 30th, 2003 in the F2 air defense variant, with 160 aircraft across 3 tranches, at a British programme cost of approximately £37 billion over its life cycle, is the most capable combat aircraft the RAF has ever operated, and one of the most expensive procurement programmes in British defence history. The unstable Delta Canard configuration, controlled by digital fly-by-wire through a flight control system that makes 40 corrections per second to an aerodynamically inherently unstable airframe, produces agility that physically conventional designs cannot match. The Typhoon can sustain 9 turns, change direction faster than any contemporary adversary, and accelerate through the transonic regime in conditions that would make earlier swing-wing aircraft uncomfortable. The MBDA, Meteor Beyond Visual Range air-to-air missile, carried exclusively on Typhoon among Western fighters currently in service, has a no-escape zone, the distance within which a target cannot outrun the missile regardless of its maneuvering, approximately 3 times larger than the AIM-12 0AMRAAM. The specific capability advantage this provides in beyond visual range combat, where most modern air engagements are decided, makes the Typhoon/Meteor combination the most capable air defense system in any European air force. Libya in 2011, Syria from 2014, and Iraq from 2014 through 2019 provided the Typhoon's sustained combat record, though in a ground attack and close air support role rather than the pure air defense role it was optimized for. The FGR-4's multi-role capability with Storm Shadow, Paveway 4 and Brimstone missiles transformed an air superiority fighter into a precision strike platform. The EAP demonstrator that led to Typhoon flew in 1986. The aircraft it spawned is scheduled to remain in service until the late 2040s. The BAE Hawk T-1A entering RAF service in 1976 as the T-1 Advanced Trainer with 72 aircraft modified to T-1A standard, carrying 2 AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles, occupied the specific and uncomfortable operational category of designated wartime point defense fighter. In the event of a major Warsaw-Pact air offensive against Britain's airfields and air defense radar chain, T-1A Hawks from the RAF's advanced training units at Valley and Chivener would have been committed to combat against Soviet aircraft. The Hawk's subsonic performance, limited endurance and lack of radar made it a marginal air defense asset. It was the only option available if Tornado F-3S had been exhausted. The Combat Hawk 100 and Hawk 200 variants, developed for export from 1984, addressed the T-1's limitations with HOTAS controls, weapons management systems, and optional radar for the 200. Malaysia, Oman, UAE, and India operated Hawk combat variants as genuine frontline aircraft rather than augmented trainers. The Hawk 200 single-seat variant demonstrated that the basic airframe could support sophisticated avionics and weapons at competitive cost, the value proposition that made it commercially successful in markets where American or European frontline fighters were unaffordable. The T-1A's wartime point defense role was formally withdrawn in 2015 when the Typhoon fleet reached sufficient numbers to provide credible coverage without requiring trainer aircraft in combat roles. The Hawk T-2 replacing the T-1 in lead-in fighter training from 2009, carries modern cockpit systems aligned with Typhoon and F-35B procedures. The aircraft that was designed in 1971 as a trainer is still training the pilots who fly Britain's most advanced combat aircraft in 2024. The Lockheed Martin F-35B, entering operational service with 617 Squadron RAF and 809 Naval Air Squadron RN from 2019, with 138 aircraft planned at a committed cost of £9.1 billion, is the first operational stealth aircraft in British service, the first British carrier-based jet since the Harrier's 2010 retirement, and the aircraft whose procurement definitively answered the question of whether Britain would maintain an indigenous fighter design capability. It would not. The F-35B is American in design, American in software, and American in the maintenance decisions that determine what weapons it can carry and when it can fly. BAE Systems manufactures approximately 15% of every F-35 built globally, the aft fuselage sections, under a work-share agreement that provides industrial employment and revenue while granting no design authority over the aircraft's fundamental parameters. Britain is the largest industrial partner in the F-35 program, with the least sovereign control over the aircraft it produces parts for. The 15% work share generates approximately £1.4 billion annually. The £9.1 billion committed to purchasing the aircraft funds the American program that BAE Systems works on. The F-35B's short takeoff and vertical landing capability, the specific characteristic that required the Royal Navy's Queen Elizabeth carriers to be built with ski jump ramps rather than catapults, means that Britain has permanently committed to a carrier configuration optimized for STOVL operations. The decision made the carriers cheaper to build and more limited in the aircraft types they can operate. If the F-35B program fails, there is no alternative carrier-capable British aircraft. The Harrier's cancellation and the F-35B's adoption are the same strategic decision made twice, 44 years apart. The Global Combat Air Programme, announced by the UK, Japan and Italy in December 2022, as the consolidation of the British Tempest and Japanese FX programs, with £2 billion committed to development through 2025 and initial operational capability targeted for 2035, is Britain's attempt to remain in the first tier of combat aircraft design after a 60-year period in which the tendency has been consistently toward licensed American designs rather than indigenous development. The GCAP represents a £60 to £100 billion investment commitment across 3 nations over 2 decades, the scale of expenditure that designing a 6th-generation combat aircraft requires. The program's technology ambitions include an adaptive cycle engine that changes its bypass ratio during flight to optimize for subsonic cruise or supersonic dash, a propulsion concept that Rolls-Royce is developing under the Orpheus program, alongside embedded sensors distributed across the airframe, AI-assisted pilot decision support, and the ability to direct loyal wingman drone aircraft. Whether these technologies will be operationally mature by 2035 is the question that every major combat aircraft program asks at this stage of development, and that only subsequent years answer. The relevant historical context is that every British ambitious fighter program has either been cancelled, the P-1154, the Anglo-French variable geometry aircraft, or delivered a decade late and over cost. GCAP's three-nation structure provides cost-sharing and political resilience against unilateral cancellation, at the cost of design compromises and the industrial politics that collaborative programs inevitably generate. Whether this is the program that reverses the long decline in British fighter design independence or the next program to demonstrate its limits is a question that 2035 will begin to answer. In the desperate winter of 1939, a revolutionary concept emerged from the Photographic Development Unit at Heston that changed the face of aerial intelligence forever. Flight Lieutenant Maurice Longbottom proposed a radical idea: strip a standard Supermarine Spitfire of all its heavy armaments and armour, pack the vacant space with advanced cameras, and fill the wings with extra fuel. By exploiting the airframe's unmatched speed and extreme ceiling, this modified Predator could overfly heavily fortified targets long before enemy air defences could even react. This marked the birth of the Spitfire PR series, a legendary lineage spanning over 1,200 specialised aircraft across 10 distinct marques. In November and December 1939, early PR-1 variants penetrated hostile airspace over Wilhelmshaven and Kiel, delivering the very first systematic photographic intelligence of German naval strongholds since the declaration of war. Years later, D-Day planners leaned heavily on this precise imagery to map out German coastal defences along the Normandy beaches, providing unparalleled detail to individual assault teams. 1,200 Spitfires flew completely unarmed, totally alone, and dangerously high, proving that aerial photography was no longer just support. It was a vital element of strategic warfare everywhere. Entering operational service in September 1941, the de Havilland Mosquito PR series shattered conventional limitations of tactical aerial scouting. With over 600 specialised photo reconnaissance variants produced across 5 primary marques, this wooden wonder expanded British photographic intelligence from localised European theatres into a global strategic enterprise. Consider the staggering reach of the PR-34 variant. Boasting an incredible 5,633-kilometre range, it regularly launched from bases in Ceylon to photograph unoccupied Singapore. Speed was its primary defence. Roaring through the skies at 668 kilometers per hour, the advanced PR-16 variant proved completely immune to enemy fighter interception. Throughout the conflict, the Mosquito PR's loss rate remained significantly lower than almost any other aircraft type serving in the Royal Air Force. During 1943 and 1944, daring night sorties over Berlin utilized high-altitude flash photography to deliver the first systematic night imagery of the Nazi capital. These pioneering techniques directly anticipated the specialized capabilities that the Canberra PR-9 would later formalize during the height of the Cold War, cementing the Mosquito's permanent legacy as a brilliant strategic trailblazer for the Allied forces. Formed in the crucible of 1943, 192 Squadron RAF was established specifically to master the invisible battlefield of airborne signals intelligence collection. Operating heavy Halifaxes, versatile Wellingtons, and swift Mosquitoes rigged with highly specialized receiver arrays, this secretive unit became Britain's premier dedicated airborne SIGINT force. Their perilous mission: hunt down, track, and characterize German radar networks and complex navigation systems over the skies of occupied Europe. The squadron's critical electronic harvest directly enabled the legendary window chaff operations during the catastrophic Hamburg raids of July 24, 1943. By mapping out specific German radar frequencies and exact antenna configurations, they allowed technicians to precisely calibrate the radar reflecting strips needed to blind enemy defenses. The jamming achieved total success because the intelligence had been perfectly collected. This triumph firmly established an enduring intelligence to countermeasures cycle that defined British electronic warfare for the next 80 years. Intercept the enemy's distinct electronic signature, analyze the raw telemetry, and design a customized defeat mechanism tailored to exact engineering measurements rather than vague specifications. This loop saved countless aircrews from certain destruction. As the Cold War froze international relations, the Gloucester Meteor PR-10 arrived in January 1951 to provide critical, high-speed intelligence across volatile global hotspots. With 59 aircraft built, this sleek platform was rushed into service as a crucial interim measure while the advanced English Electric Canberra completed its lengthy development. The PR-10 filled the capability gap beautifully, deploying with 13 Squadron to monitor the highly tense Egyptian Suez Canal zone and with 81 Squadron in the dense, perilous jungles of the Malaysian Emergency. Stripped of weapons but armed with advanced cameras, it used raw jet speed to outrun interceptors and capture high-fidelity tactical imagery. Though retired from active frontline duty by 1961, the Meteor PR-10's operational impact extended far beyond its flight logs. Its decade of intense reconnaissance operations successfully established the standard institutional procedures for processing and analyzing photographic intelligence at a massive scale. It fostered a specialized generation of expert photo interpreters whose elite analytical skills would directly support the Canberra fleet and successive Cold War surveillance systems, ensuring Britain maintained an intellectual edge over dangerous global adversaries. The English Electric Canberra PR series stands as an absolute titan of British airborne espionage, serving for 53 remarkable years on the bleeding edge of global reconnaissance. Entering frontline service in December 1953, this majestic high-altitude platform produced over 100 specialized photo reconnaissance variants. On May 28, 1957, a modified PR-9 variant soared into history, shattering a world altitude record by reaching a breathtaking 21,307 meters. The Canberra's covert operational portfolio reads like a history book of Cold War flashpoints. PR-7S conducted critical overflights of Egypt right before the explosive Suez Crisis, scouted Indonesia during the confrontation in the 1960s, and overflew highly secret Chinese nuclear test sites in 1962 under a deeply classified cooperative intelligence venture with Washington. Proving its timeless design, the PR-9 variants of 39 Squadron flew their final combat missions over war-torn Iraq in July 2006. Spanning generations, the identical airframes carried both 1953 and 2006 electronic technology, simply because no capable alternative could replace them. When finally retired, the Canberra was just as completely irreplaceable as it had been 5 decades prior. In the high-stakes arena of mid-Cold War espionage, the Handley Page Victor SR-2 served as Britain's ultimate eye in the sky. Converted from powerful Victor B-2 nuclear bombers, just 6 of these massive aircraft entered service with the elite 543 Squadron at RAF Whiten in May 1965. The Victor SR-2 was a dual-threat platform carrying an advanced array of both high-resolution photographic and highly sensitive signals intelligence-gathering equipment. It operated seamlessly at extreme ranges and punishing altitudes that only a robust V-bomber airframe could reliably sustain. However, the relentless stress of these demanding profiles took a heavy toll. By 1974, the rapidly aging airframes faced skyrocketing maintenance costs that the government could no longer justify, leading to their prompt retirement. The strategic SIGINT mantle was subsequently handed over to the Nimrod R1. Though a fleet of only 6 aircraft serving for a brief 9 years sounds modest, the Victor SR-2 left a giant strategic footprint. It operated continually on the knife edge of absolute secrecy, pushing the boundaries of what the British government could publicly acknowledge and what its clandestine intelligence services absolutely required. For 40 grueling years, the Avro Shackleton stood as Britain's unyielding shield over the freezing northern seas. With 185 airframes built across 4 marks, this rugged platform entered Coastal Command service in April 1951. The Shackleton's most devastating weapon was its legendary, bone-jarring endurance, capable of remaining airborne for a staggering 24 hours straight, to maintain a continuous, omnipresent watch over critical maritime bottlenecks like the North Atlantic approaches, the Norwegian Sea, and the strategic Gibraltar Strait choke points. To hunt elusive Soviet submarines, British engineers deployed the innovative Autolycus diesel exhaust detection system. This advanced atmospheric sensor was meticulously calibrated to detect the precise chemical signature of burning diesel fuel, exploiting the fatal vulnerability that forced diesel-electric submarines to snorkel near the surface to recharge their batteries. Proving the sheer longevity of the design, the specialized AEW.2 airborne early warning variant served faithfully with 8th Squadron until 1991. It was an extraordinary sight, a frontline platform built around World War II Lancaster bomber components flying active combat surveillance missions into the historic decade that saw the Soviet superpower completely dissolve on the global stage. Shrouded in absolute secrecy, the Hawker Siddeley Nimrod R1 operated as Britain's most highly classified airborne intelligence platform for over 37 years. Just 3 of these highly specialized electronic spies entered service with 51 Squadron at RAF Wyton in May 1974. While their exact technical capabilities remain locked behind deep classification walls, their legendary operational footprint spans the Falklands War, the Gulf War, Kosovo, Afghanistan, and Iraq. During the 1982 Falklands conflict, the R1S flew grueling, extreme-range sorties from Ascension Island to intercept Argentine communications and track radar emissions. In his memoirs, Admiral Sandy Woodward revealed that this real-time electronic harvest provided the Naval Task Force with exceptional clarity regarding Argentine operational intentions, granting him vital tactical confidence. The Nimrod R1 fleet was utterly irreplaceable because its complex collection architecture had been continuously refined and combat-proven over nearly 4 decades. When the Ministry of Defence abruptly retired the type in June 2011, no viable British successor was anywhere near ready to take its place, leaving a significant gap in Whitehall's strategic intelligence gathering capabilities. The story of the Hawker Siddeley Nimrod MR is a complex tale of unparalleled operational triumph, shadowed by a horrific structural catastrophe. 46 MR1 airframes were built starting in 1969, with 35 later upgraded to the advanced MR2 standard. During the 1982 Falklands War, a heavily modified Nimrod MR2P etched its name into aviation history by executing the longest maritime reconnaissance flight ever recorded, flying over 19 grueling hours from Ascension Island to scan the Falklands exclusion zone, enabled by multiple mid-air refuelings from Victor tankers. Yet, beneath this legendary performance hid a fatal, ticking time bomb within the aircraft's fuel system. On September 2, 2006, airframe XV230 exploded in mid-air over Afghanistan, killing all 14 brave servicemen aboard. The blistering Haddon Cave inquiry later uncovered a devastating design flaw present since 1969. A structural fatigue crack in the number 7 tank fuel pipe joint could expose leaking fuel directly to blistering hot engine bleed air. The devastating loss of XV230 fundamentally altered British military procurement and safety regulations forever, leaving an enduring mark of sorrow. It stands as one of the most notorious and jaw-dropping disasters in the history of British defence procurement. The BAE Nimrod AEW.3 was envisioned as Britain's supreme airborne early warning shield, with 11 aircraft pulled from older Nimrod MR1 airframes for conversion. Instead, it turned into an absolute black hole for taxpayer money. Cancelled on December 18, 1986, after 9 long years of agonising development, the project swallowed over £1 billion without delivering a single operationally capable aircraft to the Royal Air Force. The core engineering nightmare centred on its dual radar configuration, one looking forward, one looking backward. To create a coherent picture, these systems required a complex data fusion system to stitch the tracking feeds together. But engineers simply could not make the software function reliably. Conceding total defeat, the government killed the program, immediately pivoting to buy proven Boeing E-3 Sentry platforms from America. £1 billion completely vaporized, 0 aircraft delivered. This catastrophic failure fundamentally changed how the military handled major technical projects going forward into a new century. If the AEW.3 was a disaster, its successor became the absolute crown jewel of failed military procurement. The BAE Systems Nimrod MRA.4 held the infamous title of the single most expensive cancelled defence programme in British history. Over 14 gruelling years, a staggering £3.6 billion vanished into the project before the 2010 Strategic Defence and Security Review finally swung the executioner's axe. 9 aircraft sat in various stages of construction. Not a single one ever reached operational status. The program was doomed by an astonishing manufacturing reality. Every original Nimrod MR1 airframe had been hand-built, meaning each was unique with distinct dimensional tolerances. The brand new mass-produced wing and fuselage components simply could not be fitted without extensive, costly custom modifications to every single aircraft. The sudden 2010 cancellation left the Royal Navy completely blind, facing a gaping maritime patrol deficiency that persisted for a decade. In a final act of humiliation, the advanced MRA-4 airframes were chopped up and sold as scrap metal, leaving behind nothing but a multi-billion-pound warning about contract assumptions. Entering RAF service with 5 Army Cooperation Squadron in March 2008, the Raytheon Sentinel R1 fundamentally revolutionized tactical intelligence, giving the British Army its first organic, wide-area ground surveillance platform. Equipped with a powerful synthetic aperture radar and cutting-edge ground-moving target indicator technology, the Sentinel possessed the uncanny ability to detect and track individual moving vehicles on the ground. It peered effortlessly through thick clouds, pitch darkness, and blinding sandstorms, all while orbiting at extreme altitudes comfortably beyond the deadly reach of enemy man-portable air defense systems. In the skies over Libya in 2011, the Sentinel R1 proved its immense worth, flying relentless 24-hour persistent surveillance missions to track Gaddafi loyalist forces. It fed NATO operations planners real-time telemetry of armoured column movements, which was used directly to cue awaiting strike aircraft with devastating precision. Although the Ministry of Defence originally scheduled the Sentinel for retirement in 2021, its unique capabilities forced an extension to 2024. The magnificent aircraft remained in service simply because no alternative existed that could replicate what it uniquely provided. Entering active service with 14 Squadron at RAF Waddington in 2009, the BAE Systems Shadow R1 introduced a highly effective approach to tactical oversight. Based on the dependable Beechcraft King Air 350 airframe, the Shadow became Britain's premier turboprop ISTAR platform, specifically designed to deliver persistent tactical surveillance at lower altitudes and slower airspeeds than the jet-powered Sentinel. While the aircraft's full sensor suite remains highly classified, its advanced electro-optical and infrared video capabilities are legendary. The choice of a commercial turboprop airframe was an engineering masterstroke. It provided an exceptionally low radar cross-section and a quiet acoustic signature compared to loud jet alternatives. This stealthy profile proved invaluable when tracking targets without alerting them to the spy plane's overhead presence. Advancing this vital capability, the Shadow R2 upgrade delivered from 2020 onward, integrating state-of-the-art sensor packages and communication suites. These advancements dramatically slashed the latency between initial sensor collection and actionable military intelligence from long hours to mere minutes, giving ground commanders an immense advantage over active adversaries operating within highly volatile, modern combat environments. The arrival of the Boeing P-8A Poseidon MRA-1 marked the closing of a perilous 10-year gap in British defences. When the Nimrod Mr2 was abruptly retired in 2010, the decision was defended as an acceptable strategic risk. Yet, for a solid decade, the proud Royal Navy operated without a single organic maritime patrol aircraft, forced to rely on American and Canadian P-3 Orions via bilateral sharing agreements to monitor its own home waters. Entering service with 201 Squadron at RAF Lossiemouth in April 2020, 9 advanced P-8A aircraft now shoulder the intense burden once carried by 46 Nimrods. This severe fleet compression perfectly illustrates the staggering leap in modern technological capability. The financial contrast is equally jaw-dropping. While the failed indigenous Nimrod MRA.4 program famously burned through £3.6 billion and delivered absolutely nothing, the American-built Poseidon fleet cost approximately £3 billion and completely filled the critical surveillance void. It was a pragmatic, numbers-driven choice made in a different decade, forcing Britain to accept that buying foreign iron was the only way to safeguard its vast maritime domain. The Boeing E-3D Sentry AEW.1 entered service in July 1991, instantly transforming Britain's airborne early warning capabilities at a critical historical juncture. 7 of these massive radar-domed aircraft were integrated into 8 Squadron, arriving precisely in time to anchor vital coalition operations during the 1991 Gulf War. Far from off-the-shelf purchases, these specific British variants carried significant indigenous modifications, including powerful CFM56 engines, advanced JTIDS communications, and enhanced electronic support measures receivers. Yet, the E-3D's highly successful 30-year operational career across global hotspots like the Gulf, the Balkans, Libya, and Afghanistan was only possible because the domestic Nimrod A EW.3 program had failed so completely. Forced by technological crisis to abandon its own design, Britain bought the best available alternative on the global market. It turned out to be an exceptional decision as the Sentry proved itself to be a peerless, reliable sky sentinel. By the time the fleet was retired in August 2021, to be replaced by a future order of 5 E-7A Wedgetails, the Sentry had firmly cemented its legacy as an indispensable cornerstone of Royal Air Power. Entering operational use with the elite 51 Squadron at RAF Waddington from 2014, the Boeing RC-135W rivet joint, designated Air Seeker in British service, re-established a vital strategic capability. When the venerable Nimrod R1 was retired in 2011, Britain was left electronically blind in the signals intelligence arena for 3 agonizing years. The Airseeker fleet completely eliminated that dangerous vulnerability from 2022 onward. Following Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, these highly specialized aircraft began flying regular, intense surveillance missions over international waters directly adjacent to the conflict zone. Operating in plain sight, they provided real-time monitoring of Russian military communications, active radar deployments, and complex electronic warfare signatures. It is a high-stakes game of electronic cat and mouse. The aircraft's physical presence is boldly announced to the world via public flight tracking software. Yet, its deeply classified signals intelligence collection remains locked in absolute secrecy. This deliberate asymmetry defines the modern airborne intelligence mission, projecting a powerful deterrent presence while silently harvesting the adversary's most sensitive electronic secrets from the high skies, ensuring Whitehall maintains a razor-sharp operational edge. The General Atomics MQ-9B Protector RG-1 represents the logical, uncrewed endpoint of a trajectory that began with the PR Spitfire. With 16 aircraft ordered entering operational evaluation with 31 Squadron at RAF Waddington from 2024, this platform redefines the limits of persistence. Boasting an incredible 40 hours of unrefueled endurance, it is controlled entirely by a ground crew who may sit an entire continent away from the aircraft itself. No pilot is endangered, no wreckage can be paraded through Moscow museums. Yet this shift reveals a profound dependency. The Protector is American-designed and American-built, continuing a striking pattern across the entire British ISR lineage. The Nimrod R1 was the very last indigenous British-designed intelligence aircraft. Every successor, the Sentry, Rivet Joint, Poseidon, and now the Protector, is a foreign airframe adapted for British use. The capability is British, the intelligence collected is British, but the aircraft itself is not. This uncrewed guardian marks a brave new world of autonomous surveillance, where the eye in the sky is completely robotic, tireless, and foreign in its engineering DNA. Entering active service in September 1917, the Handley Page 0/400 was the pioneer that established Britain's strategic bombing doctrine long before the concept was even formally articulated. Over 400 of these massive biplanes were constructed. On September 17, 1917, an O/400 dropped the first 748-kilogram SN bomb in combat against the Burbach ironworks near Saarbrücken, marking the largest bomb detonated by any aircraft to that point in human history. Powering this giant were twin Rolls-Royce Eagle 8 engines, generating a combined 720 horsepower. This propulsion system gave the aircraft a maximum speed of 156 kilometers per hour at sea level. Its payload was truly transformative compared to previous single-engine designs, though its five-man crew operated in terrifyingly exposed positions with virtually zero protection against freezing weather or enemy gunfire. While the O-400's immediate strategic impact remained limited by mechanical reliability and operational numbers, the core concept it successfully validated, long-range, large, payload night bombing against industrial and urban targets, became the foundational framework for British air power for the next 25 years, paving the way for the massive 1,000-bomber raids of World War II. The Handley Page /1500 was designed for a single, terrifying mission that history's precise timing ultimately prevented: the total destruction of Berlin. Only 35 of these super-heavy bombers were built, entering service in November 1918. Boasting a massive 38.4-meter wingspan and an unprecedented 3,400-kilogram bomb capacity, this giant was powered by 4 robust Eagle engines. The V/1500 possessed the incredible range required to launch from airfields in East Anglia, strike deep into Germany's capital, and return safely. By the morning of November 11, 1918, 3 V/1500 aircraft had successfully achieved full operational readiness. However, at 11 o'clock that very morning, the armistice was signed. The highly anticipated Berlin mission was abruptly cancelled, ensuring that Germany's capital escaped strategic bombing during the First World War. The V/1500 existed purely for a world-changing purpose that was never fulfilled. It holds a unique position as the very first British bomber to be cancelled by the arrival of peace rather than its own technical inadequacy or mechanical failure. This bittersweet distinction would go on to echo through the halls of British aviation history, foreshadowing many controversial military cancellations in the decades to follow. The Vickers, Virginia, and Handley Page. Hayford represented the backbone of the Royal Air Force's heavy bomber strength throughout the turbulent interwar period. 124 units of each aircraft were produced, entering service in 1924 and 1933 respectively. Yet, these biplanes were relics of a bygone era. The Virginia, generating 570 horsepower per engine, crawled through the sky, slower than many fighters from the First World War. Even the Hayford, introduced nearly a decade later, could only manage a maximum speed of 229 kilometers per hour. The true historical significance of these interwar biplane bombers was not operational, but deeply doctrinal. The Air Staff utilized these stagnant years to codify the theory of strategic bombing into a formal military doctrine. It was a firm conviction famously articulated by Trenchard that heavy bombers could break an enemy's absolute will to fight by systematically destroying the industrial and urban infrastructure, sustaining their war economy. However, this theoretical focus came at a steep price. When Luftwaffe development exploded in 1934, Britain was still flying biplanes designed in the early 1920s, creating a dangerous technological gap. Entering service in March 1937, the Bristol Blenheim was a crucial cornerstone of bomber command, with over 4,400 units built across 3 distinct marks. At the outbreak of the Second World War, the Blenheim provided the primary medium bomber strength for the Royal Air Force. However, it would soon demonstrate at a truly catastrophic cost in human life that unescorted daylight bombing against heavily defended enemy targets was entirely unviable. Blenheim crews flying daylight raids against German shipping networks in 1940 and 1941 suffered horrific loss rates that routinely exceeded 20% per mission. A stark example occurred on August 12, 1941, when 18 Blenheims aggressively attacked German power stations at Cologne. A mere 12 aircraft managed to return. The glaring inadequacy of the Blenheim for daylight operations single-handedly drove the total restructuring of Bomber Command's operational philosophy. From mid-1940 onward, night bombing was adopted not as a preferred tactical strategy, but as the only survivable option left. Aircraft that faced certain destruction by day could at least utilize the cover of darkness to reach their targets. The Blenheim's tactical failure ultimately defined the entire architecture of the war. The Armstrong-Whitworth-Whitley, with over 1,800 units built, entered service in March 1937 and earned the distinction of flying the very first key RAF bombing operations of the Second World War. Long before explosive bombs were authorized by High Command, the Whitley carried the war directly to the German homeland in the form of propaganda leaflets. On the night of September 3, 1939, Whitleys dropped the conflict's first leaflets over Bremen and Hamburg. Months later, in May 1940, they became the first RAF aircraft to strike the German mainland with live ordnance. Visually, the Whitley was defined by its distinctive nose-down flying attitude. This was produced by a unique wing designed with a high angle of incidence, an aerodynamic idiosyncrasy that ultimately provided no operational or tactical benefit whatsoever. On the night of March 19, 1940, a force of Whitleys conducted the first raid on German soil, targeting a seaplane base at Hernum. Tragically, the operation killed no enemy combatants and destroyed nothing of strategic value. The Whitley successfully carried the war to Germany, but in these early, desperate days, the bombs almost entirely missed their targets. Nicknamed the Flying Frying Pan due to its bizarre proportions, the Handley Page Hampton entered service in September 1938, with over 1,400 built. Its fuselage was so incredibly narrow, measuring a mere 0.9 meters across, that the crew members literally could not pass one another during flight. This cramped design left aircrews trapped in their positions during intense combat. In August 1940, Hamptons attempted highly dangerous daylight attacks against the heavily defended Dortmund-Ems Canal. Over 3 brutal days of operations, 60 aircraft were lost from the attacking force. While 2 Victoria Crosses were awarded to crews showing extraordinary bravery, the citations documented a flawed tactical doctrine that was killing well-trained aircrew at unsustainable rates. Acknowledging its fatal vulnerabilities, the RAF withdrew the Hampton from front-line strategic bombing operations in 1942. The aircraft was subsequently transferred to Coastal Command and converted for torpedo bomber duties. Paradoxically, the bomber that had proved completely unsurvivable during daylight raids over mainland Europe found a second life, performing adequately on maritime patrol missions where enemy fighter opposition was far less consistent and concentrated. The Vickers Wellington stands as a true legend of industrial mobilization, with an astonishing 11,461 aircraft manufactured across 29 distinct variants. Entering service in October 1938, the Wellington became the most heavily produced British bomber of the war, carrying the weight of the strategic bombing campaign through its darkest and most critical period from 1940 to 1942. Designed by the brilliant Barnes Wallis, the Wellington featured a revolutionary geodetic basket weave airframe. This unique structural matrix distributed mechanical loads across the entire outer skin, allowing the aircraft to absorb catastrophic battle damage that would have easily shattered a conventional bomber. During Operation Millennium on May 30th, 1942, Air Marshal Arthur Harris's historic first 1,000-bomber raid on Cologne, the Wellington formed the absolute backbone of the fleet, contributing 599 aircraft to the total force. The resulting raid devastated the city, destroying thousands of homes and shifting the tides of total war. Wellington variants ultimately served with distinction in every major theatre of conflict, proving their versatility as maritime patrol bombers, lethal torpedo carriers, long-range transports, and rugged trainers across the globe. The short Stirling entered service in August 1940 as the very first four-engine heavy bomber to reach RAF Bomber Command. Over 2,300 were built, yet the Stirling's operational career was severely crippled from the start by a bizarre design constraint imposed by the Air Ministry. Officials mandated that the aircraft must fit completely within existing RAF hangar doors, strictly capping its maximum wingspan at 30.5 meters. This forced compromise dramatically reduced the Stirling's operational ceiling to just over 5,000 meters, nearly 6,000 meters lower than the later Lancaster. This restriction forced the Stirling to fly directly within the heavily concentrated altitude band where German anti-aircraft flak was most lethal and precisely calibrated. Furthermore, its rigid, three-section bomb bay completely prevented the carriage of larger bombs, rendering it obsolete as the area bombing campaign scaled up to massive, multi-ton ordnance. By late 1943, the Stirling was completely withdrawn from front-line strategic bombing duties. The aircraft itself had not failed. Rather, it had been fatally compromised by short-sighted peacetime requirements. 50 feet of hangar door clearance had tragically dictated the ceiling of Britain's first heavy bomber. The Avro Lancaster is arguably the most iconic British warplane of the Second World War. Over 7,300 units were manufactured across 7 variants, entering service in March 1942. The Lancaster became the ultimate hammer of Bomber Command, flying an incredible 156,000 wartime sorties and dropping over 600,000 tons of ordnance, accounting for 64% of Britain's entire wartime total. Yet this offensive triumph came at a horrific price. 3,349 Lancasters were destroyed in combat. This equaled a 2.2% loss rate per sortie, a mathematical statistic that compounded into a near certainty of death or capture over a standard 30-mission operational tour. Legendary units like 617 Squadron utilized heavily modified Lancasters carrying the famous Upkeep bouncing bomb to breach the vital Möhne and Ada dams in 1943. Flooding the Ruhr Valley. The Lancaster also carried the monstrous 12,000-pound Tallboy and 22,000-pound Grand Slam earthquake bombs to crush hardened targets like the battleship Tirpitz. In the end, the brutal mathematics of attrition were paid for with the lives of over 55,000 brave aircrew. Often overshadowed by its famous contemporary, the Handley-Page Halifax was a towering achievement in its own right, with over 6,100 aircraft built across 9 distinct variants. Entering frontline service in March 1941, the Halifax served as Bomber Command's second vital 4-engine heavy bomber. However, early marks faced severe aerodynamic issues, resulting in a staggering 3.6% loss rate per sortie compared to the Lancaster's 2.2%. This variance meant that Halifax crews faced significantly worse odds of survival while flying into identical, heavily defended German targets. The absolute brutality of this attrition peaked during the infamous Nuremberg raid of March 30th, 1944, where 37 Halifaxes were destroyed in a single night. Despite these challenges, the Halifax proved to be an incredibly versatile workhorse, adapting to every role imaginable. From area and precision bombing to clandestine special operations, executive supply drops and glider towing during the airborne assault at Arnhem. Flying over 82,000 operational sorties, this rugged bomber stood shoulder to shoulder with the Lancaster throughout the entire strategic campaign, earning a bloody but deeply respected place in aviation history. The de Havilland Mosquito completely revolutionized aerial warfare by proving that a bomber did not need heavy armor or defensive guns to survive. Built almost entirely of wood, over 7,700 Mosquitoes were produced across all variants, with dedicated bomber versions entering active service in May 1942. Designer Geoffrey de Havilland championed a radical philosophy. That raw speed was the only defense a bomber truly required. He was proven spectacularly correct. Operating at extreme velocities, the unarmed Mosquito achieved an astonishingly low combat loss rate of just 0.62% per sortie, a 4-fold survivability advantage over the heavy Lancaster. This incredible performance allowed Mosquito crews to conduct high-value, ultra-precise daylight strikes. They famously bombed the Gestapo headquarters in Oslo, breached the walls of Amiens prison to free French resistance fighters, and destroyed the Netherlands Records Office to safeguard Jewish citizens from deportation. Furthermore, the Light Night Striking Force harassed Berlin for 170 consecutive nights. The unique aircraft that the Air Ministry initially rejected ultimately became the most operationally versatile and safest British bomber of the entire war. The English Electric Canberra thrust the Royal Air Force firmly into the jet age, entering active service in May 1951. Over 900 Canberras were manufactured for the RAF, with an additional 400 built under license overseas. This legendary aircraft achieved an astonishing 57 years of continuous military service, longer than any other jet platform in RAF history. The Canberra was a record breaker from the start. It was the first jet-powered bomber to enter British service, the first jet to cross the Atlantic Ocean non-stop, and it held more simultaneous world altitude records than any other aircraft in history. Its long operational career led to deeply ironic historical encounters, most notably during the Falklands War of 1982. During that conflict, Argentine Air Force Canberras launched active bombing raids against the British Naval Task Force, while British RAF Canberras simultaneously provided critical photographic intelligence support for the counter-offensive. One Argentine Canberra was ultimately shot down by a British Sea Dart missile. The RAF's specialised PR-9 reconnaissance variants continued flying active missions until 2006, proving the incredible longevity of a masterpiece design that surpassed all expectations. The Vickers Valiant holds a historic, yet chilling legacy as the very first member of Britain's legendary nuclear V-Force. Entering active service in February 1955, 107 Valiants were constructed to project Britain's global strategic power. On October 11, 1956, a Valiant dropped the nation's first operational atomic bomb during Operation Buffalo over Maralinga, Australia. Just 7 months later, on May 15, 1957, another Valiant made history by releasing Britain's first thermonuclear hydrogen bomb during Operation Grapple over Christmas Island. However, the Valiant was not confined solely to nuclear deterrence. Only 3 weeks after its first atomic test, the fleet was deployed for conventional operations during the Suez Crisis, striking Egyptian airfields at Al-Mazrah, Kibrit, and Cairo West. Tragically, the career of this pioneering jet bomber was cut short by the brutal realities of low-level flight stress. In January 1965, severe metal fatigue was discovered across the fleet during routine inspections, forcing the immediate and permanent grounding of every aircraft. The entire fleet of 107 Valiants was abruptly scrapped. Not a single intact example was preserved for history. The Avro Vulcan remains the most visually striking and awe-inspiring aircraft ever to wear the colours of the Royal Air Force. Entering service in July 1956, 136 of these massive delta-wing bombers were constructed. In its definitive B Mark II configuration, boasting uprated Bristol Olympus engines and the nuclear-tipped Blue Steel standoff missile, the Vulcan represented the absolute pinnacle of British strategic deterrence. The Soviet Union took this weapon system incredibly seriously. The Vulcan's spectacular high-altitude performance was a primary driver for massive Soviet investment in the S-75 Divina surface-to-air missile system. Although designed to deter a nuclear apocalypse, the Vulcan's most famous operational hour occurred at the very end of its career during the Falklands War. Operation Black Buck 1 saw a lone Vulcan execute an epic 12,654-kilometre round trip to bomb the runway at Port Stanley. This monumental mission required 11 mid-air refuelings from a massive fleet of Victor tankers just to support a single attacking aircraft. Spending decades on high-alert nuclear readiness, 15 minutes from launch, this South Atlantic conventional strike became the ultimate combat validation for an aviation icon. Entering service in April 1957, the Handley Page Victor was the third and undoubtedly the most aerodynamically advanced of Britain's trio of V-bombers. 86 Victors were manufactured, featuring a highly distinctive crescent wing design that provided unparalleled high-altitude capabilities. This advanced aerodynamics allowed the Victor to achieve the highest operational ceiling of the entire V-Force, cruising at a staggering 18,290 meters. However, as Soviet surface-to-air missile technology advanced, the Victor was forced to adapt to a completely different role. Converted into the K. Mark II aerial refueling tanker, the Victor became the indispensable logistical backbone of the Royal Air Force. During the 1982 Falklands War, Victor tankers provided the complex refueling matrix required to send a Vulcan bomber over Port Stanley. Nearly a decade later, they successfully supported every British fast jet mission during the 1991 Gulf War. When the Victor was finally retired in 1993, it had completed 36 years of vital service. An airframe originally engineered to unleash Britain's nuclear devastating power spent the twilight of its career keeping its supersonic replacements fueled and airborne. The Batey TSR-2 is the ultimate what-if of British aviation history, cancelled on April 6, 1965, by Defence Secretary Denis Healey after nearly £200 million had already been spent. It remains the most technically ambitious military aircraft Britain ever attempted to construct. Engineered to achieve a blistering Mach 2.5 at high altitude and a terrifying Mach 1.1 just 60 metres above the ground, the TSR-2 forced British industry to solve unprecedented engineering hurdles in advanced metallurgy, terrain following radar, and propulsion. The single completed prototype, serial number XR219, took to the skies on September 27, 1964, successfully completing 24 test flights before political forces killed the project. While the aircraft proved it could easily meet its design goals, soaring cost projections doomed it. Shockingly, following cancellation, the government ordered the immediate destruction of all specialised manufacturing jigs and existing airframes to prevent the project from ever being resurrected. Only 2 surviving airframes escaped the scrap heap because staff at RAF Cosford defiantly refused to destroy them, preserving a tragic monument to broken British aerospace ambition. The Blackburn Buccaneer was a rugged, low-level strike aircraft that the Royal Air Force initially rejected, later reluctantly accepted, and ultimately praised as one of the finest weapons in the NATO inventory. Entering Fleet Air Arms service in July 1962 and later joining the RAF in October 1969, 210 Buccaneers were built. Originally designed for the Royal Navy as a carrier-based nuclear strike platform, the Buccaneer excelled at ultra-low-level supersonic flight, screaming across the terrain at Mach 0.85, just 60 meters off the ground. Decades later, during Operation Desert Storm in 1991, the aging Buccaneer proved its immense value. Deployed to the Gulf War, 6 Buccaneers fitted with advanced pave spike laser designator pods flew 218 dangerous operational sorties. They acted as the essential targeting eyes for newer Tornado strike jets, which lacked their own internal laser designation capabilities. When the last Buccaneers were finally retired in March 1994, they concluded 32 years of distinguished service. The aircraft, once dismissed as a naval compromise, had become the RAF's premier low-level strike platform. Entering service in June 1982, the variable geometry Panavia Tornado GR went on to participate in more operational combat campaigns than any previous strike aircraft in Royal Air Force history. 228 Tornadoes were manufactured for the RAF, serving as the frontline hammer across global conflicts including the 1991 Gulf War, Bosnia, Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and the intensive air campaign against ISIS from 2014 to 2019. During the opening nights of Operation Desert Storm, Tornado crews flew extremely hazardous, ultra-low-level runway denial missions deep into heavily defended Iraqi airspace. This high-risk tactic came at a brutal cost. 6 Tornadoes were shot down, representing a 10% loss rate, the highest of any coalition aircraft type in the war, major midlife upgrades transformed the fleet into the GR4 configuration, integrating GPS, guided weaponry, and lethal Storm Shadow cruise missiles. The Tornado, originally engineered to sprint beneath Soviet radar screens on the nuclear battlefields of Cold War Europe, spent its final operational years delivering precision-guided strikes against terrorist infrastructure. It was finally retired in March 2019 after 37 years of continuous service. Entering service as a multi-role ground attack platform in July 2007, the Eurofighter Typhoon FGR-4 is currently the sole fixed-wing platform delivering the Royal Air Force's strategic precision strike capability. Following the emotional retirement of the Tornado, the Typhoon assumed total responsibility for Britain's airborne offensive operations. To achieve this, the FGR-4 is armed with the devastating Storm Shadow cruise missile featuring a 450-kilogram warhead and an operational range exceeding 560 kilometers, representing the absolute furthest conventional strike reach available to the modern RAF. The Typhoon achieved its combat debut utilizing the Storm Shadow during Operation Elemi over Libya in 2011. This was followed by years of intensive combat operations against Islamic State targets across Iraq and Syria, with Typhoons launching daily from RAF Akrotiri to deliver high-precision Paveway 4 laser-guided bombs. The long, historic evolutionary lineage of British air power stretching from the timber-framed Handley Page O/400 dropping basic bombs over Saarbrücken in 1917 to the modern Typhoon launching autonomous cruise missiles with sub-meter accuracy represents a century of relentless technological advancement in the art of aerial warfare. Long before modern helicopters dominated the battlefield, the foundation of rotary wing flight was laid by a visionary Spanish engineer named Juan de la Cierva. Developing his concepts in close collaboration with British aviation pioneer A.V. Rowe, Cierva engineered a series of radical autogyros built under strict Royal Air Force contracts from 1925 through the late 1930s. These bizarre aircraft brilliantly demonstrated the tactical advantages of slow-speed, low-altitude flight. The legendary C-30 model could cruise effortlessly at just 40 kilometers per hour without stalling, land in incredibly confined spaces, and hug treetop altitudes over hostile terrain where fixed-wing aircraft dared not fly. Mechanically, its true masterpiece was the articulated rotor head featuring innovative flapping and drag hinges that allowed each blade to move independently. This single breakthrough solved the deadly issue of dissymmetry of lift and made stable rotary flight a reality. Tragically, Cierva died in a 1936 airliner crash, but his intellectual legacy endured. His American licensee, Igor Sikorsky, directly adapted these identical hinge principles to construct the world-changing VS-300 prototype. Britain pioneered the vital technology, providing the fundamental blueprint from which every future modern helicopter design would ultimately descend. In 1957, the Saunders-Rose Skeeter earned its place in military history as the very first British-designed light helicopter to enter operational service. Achieving this milestone was a grueling engineering journey. The aircraft's development lineage stretched back to the primitive Cierva W.14 prototype in 1948, requiring 4 separate and extensive airframe redesigns before creating a machine that the demanding British military would finally accept. Production totaled 73 aircraft, which primarily served with the Army Air Corps in critical artillery observation roles. However, the Skeeter was plagued by a fundamental flaw: its powertrain. The 215 horsepower Gypsy major engine proved severely marginal under operational stress. This critical performance deficit became painfully evident during deployments across the Middle East, where high ambient temperatures and daunting density altitudes crippled hover capabilities well below acceptable safety margins. Despite these severe operational limitations, the Skeeter flew on until its ultimate withdrawal from frontline service in 1968. Its primary legacy was institutional rather than mechanical. The Skeeter gave the fledgling Army Air Corps its first authentic experience managing light rotary aviation, establishing the tactical battlefield doctrines that would later be perfected by legendary successors like the Scout and Lynx. The Bristol Sycamore stands as a monumental milestone, the first British-designed helicopter to achieve widespread adoption within the Royal Air Force. Entering service in 1952, 180 aircraft were constructed across 6 distinct variants. The Sycamore quickly became the frontline pioneer of British counterinsurgency warfare. Deployed to the dense, unforgiving jungles of Malaya between 1953 and 1956, it revolutionized combat operations. Operating under 194 Squadron, these rugged machines forged the British military's very first systematic tactical doctrine for casualty evacuation, reconnaissance, and battlefield resupply. Pilots routinely descended into tight, improvised clearings hacked out of the canopy by ground troops, extracting critically wounded soldiers directly from active combat zones. These perilous missions established standard operating procedures that defined subsequent British air campaigns in Aden, Borneo, and the Falklands. Meanwhile, Germany-based Sycamores of 118 Squadron pioneered grueling search and rescue operations over the volatile North Sea and Baltic waters from 1954 to 1959. Though its range and payload capacity remained strictly marginal in these brutal maritime environments, the Sycamore proved the absolute necessity of rotary rescue assets, paving the way for the high-end, heavy-duty successors that would follow. Entering Royal Navy service in 1950, the Westland Dragonfly was the foundational pillar that established British naval aviation's rotary wing capability. 149 aircraft were manufactured under a direct license of the American Sikorsky S-51. This critical decision by Westland management represented a frank, highly controversial assessment of the era. American helicopter technology in the late 1940s was simply 5 years ahead of domestic British development. Choosing licensing over independent engineering sacrificed creative sovereignty, but it instantly provided invaluable production experience and a battle-ready platform. The Dragonfly proved its immense worth in the grueling environment of the Korean War, operating from the decks of aircraft carriers like HMS Theseus and HMS Ocean. Its primary role was the perilous plane guard duty, hovering alongside carriers during high-risk takeoffs and landings to pull downed aviators from freezing seas. These intense operations demonstrated a vital strategic lesson. The helicopter's true value was entirely disproportionate to its modest size. A single, primitive Dragonfly could rescue elite, highly trained combat pilots who would otherwise have perished in deck accidents, permanently securing the rotary engine's place within the fleet's core operational doctrine. The Westland Whirlwind cemented its place in global military history on November 6, 1956, by spearheading the world's very first amphibious helicopter assault during the Suez Crisis. Operating from the decks of HMS Ocean and HMS Theseus, 22 whirlwinds from 45. Commando executed a daring rapid deployment. They successfully transported 415 Royal Marines along with their heavy equipment straight onto the beaches of Port Said. This historic operation proved the validity of vertical envelopment, fundamentally redefining global amphibious warfare doctrines for the next 60 years. Westland built 401 whirlwinds under license from the American Sikorsky S-55, but the aircraft's true evolution arrived with the legendary HAR-10 variant. This upgrade replaced the aging, temperamental piston engine with a revolutionary Bristol Siddeley Gnome turboshaft engine. The conversion instantly doubled the helicopter's usable payload, drastically enhanced mechanical reliability, and delivered the robust performance required for high-stakes search and rescue operations. Stationed at coastal bases around the United Kingdom, RAF Whirlwinds transformed hazardous maritime rescue missions from desperate gambles into a routine, highly efficient safety net, leaving a lasting humanitarian legacy across the British Isles. The Westland Wessex is a legendary symbol of British military resilience, serving across 4 decades from the heights of the Cold War to the freezing storms of the Falklands. 382 of these robust, turbine-powered machines were built, entering service in 1961. The Wessex's finest hour occurred on April the 22nd, 1982, amidst the jagged peaks of South Georgia's Fortuna Glacier. After 2 aircraft crashed in a blinding whiteout, Lieutenant Commander Ian Stanley braved extreme turbulence and zero visibility in his Wessex HU-5. In a display of sheer flying mastery, his 3rd rescue attempt successfully recovered 16 stranded men, including the crews of the downed helicopters, in a single, heavily overloaded lift that drastically exceeded the aircraft's certified design limits. For this heroic feat, Stanley was awarded the Distinguished Service Order. Let this sink in. A machine designed to carry 12 carried 16 over a shifting glacier. Beyond the Falklands, the versatile Wessex became the ubiquitous backbone of British operations worldwide, flying intense combat and transport sorties through the Northern Ireland Campaign, the brutal Borneo confrontation, and the hostile Aden emergency. It even served as a prestigious VIP transport for the royal family, remaining in frontline service until 2003. The Bristol Belvedere holds a unique and distinct place in the annals of British aviation as the only tandem rotor helicopter ever operated by the Royal Air Force. Entering frontline service in September 1961, a mere 26 of these unusual twin-engine heavy lifters were built. Despite their limited numbers, the Belvederes proved absolutely indispensable during the Indonesian confrontation in Borneo from 1962 to 1966. Operating over vast, trackless expanses of dense rainforest, these powerful machines performed remarkable logistical feats, airlifting heavy 105mm artillery pieces directly into forward jungle outposts along the Sarawak border. These strategic positions were completely unreachable by road and entirely inaccessible to any other transport aircraft in the British inventory. Yet, despite demonstrating the unparalleled operational advantages of the tandem rotor configuration, widely recognized as the most aerodynamically efficient layout for heavy lifting, the entire Belvedere fleet was abruptly retired by 1969. Crippling defense budget constraints and a strategic shift toward purchasing American aircraft, such as the licensed Chinook, sealed its fate. Britain abandoned independent domestic development of heavy-lift tandem rotorcraft, ensuring the Belvedere would remain a rare, short-lived chapter in British military history. The Westland Scout AH-1 and its specialised naval counterpart, the Wasp HAS-1, represent a major milestone. They were the first operational military helicopters designed entirely from scratch by British engineers without any foreign licensing basis. Entering active service in 1963, Westland manufactured 150 Scouts for land operations and 98 Wasps for maritime deployment. The compact, agile Wasp secured its place in naval law on April 25, 1982, during the dramatic recapture of South Georgia. Operating from the small deck of the ice patrol ship HMS Endurance, a Wasp located the Argentine submarine ARA Santa Fe and fired wire-guided AS.12 missiles. The resulting direct hits marked the first time a shipborne British helicopter successfully engaged a hostile surface target in combat. On land, the Scout served as a rugged, dependable battlefield scout and utility transport. These aircraft proved remarkably durable. The final frontline Scouts were not retired until 1994, marking over 31 years of continuous service for a platform designed in the late 1950s. The naval Wasps retired earlier in 1988, gracefully handing over their tight frigate deck spots to the far more capable and advanced Westland Lynx. The Westland Lynx is a true masterpiece of British aerospace engineering, renowned worldwide for its astonishing agility and blistering speed. Entering operational military service in 1977, this legendary aircraft shattered records on August 11, 1986, when a specially modified Lynx set the absolute helicopter world speed record, screaming through the skies at over 400 kilometers per hour, a record it held unchallenged until 2013. Westland built 446 airframes across 13 distinct variants, exporting the design to 14 nations. In combat, the naval Lynx proved lethal. During the 1991 Gulf War, Lynxes operating from HMS Cardiff and HMS Gloucester hunted down Iraqi patrol boats in the northern Persian Gulf, devastating the targets with Sea Skua missiles in the Royal Navy's first surface combat action since the Falklands War. On land, Army variants like the AH-7 and AH-9 served as terrifying anti-tank platforms in Germany, Bosnia, Kosovo, Iraq, and Afghanistan, bristling with TOW missiles, heavy 20mm cannons, and 70mm rocket pods. With a stunning legacy spanning 50 years of continuous production and global frontline service, the iconic Lynx remains the direct ancestor of modern British rotary warfare. Entering operational service in 1969, the Westland Sea King became the most versatile, heavily deployed British helicopter of the entire Cold War era. Manufactured under license from Sikorsky's S-61 design, Westland constructed 330 airframes across 10 highly specialised marques. The Sea King evolved far beyond its American roots, serving simultaneously as an advanced anti-submarine platform, a rugged commando assault transport, an airborne early warning asset, and a legendary search and rescue machine. During the 1982 Falklands War, the famed Green Parrots, HC-4, Sea Kings of 846 Naval Air Squadron flew continuously for 18 hours straight on May 21st, inserting the entire 3 Commando Brigade onto the islands in the largest British helicopter assault since the Suez Crisis. Meanwhile, the iconic yellow HAR.3 variants became the beloved guardian angels of the British coastline. Flying with RAF search and rescue flights from 1978 all the way until 2016, the Sea King's 47 years of continuous SAR operation represents the longest unbroken commitment to a single aircraft type in British aviation history, saving thousands of lives from the unforgiving northern seas. In 1973, the sleek Westland Gazelle AH-1 and the robust Westland Puma HC-1 entered active service, born from the historic 1967 Anglo-French helicopter agreement. This unprecedented treaty saw Westland and Aerospatiale exchange design authority across 3 key aircraft types, yielding 282 Gazelles and 48 Pumas built right in the United Kingdom. Each machine filled a vital tactical niche. In the skies over Northern Ireland from 1973 onward, the nimble Gazelle conducted relentless, low-altitude aerial surveillance operations that formed the very nerve centre of military intelligence gathering throughout the bitter years of the Troubles. Concurrently, the twin-engine Puma HC-1 established itself as the Royal Air Force's premier battlefield support helicopter. It proved its immense worth across global flashpoints, flying grueling combat sorties through the Cold War, the Gulf War, Bosnia, Kosovo, and Afghanistan. The platform's incredible longevity is legendary. An extensive HC2 digital conversion program in 2012 fitted new engines and glass cockpits. Amazingly, an airframe designed in the late 1960s remains a critical frontline RAF asset well past 2024, triumphantly enduring through 2 full generations of intensive upgrades. Entering Royal Air Force service in 1982, the twin-rotor Boeing Chinook is the undisputed heavy-lift champion of British military aviation. The fleet's legendary status was forged by ZA-718, Bravo November, the miraculous sole survivor of the Exocet missile attack on the Atlantic conveyor. For 18 grueling days, it flew 109 hours, single-handedly moving 1,500 troops and 500 tons of cargo across the Falklands. Decades later, in Afghanistan's Helmand province, Chinooks performed critical medical evacuation missions, rushing mangled soldiers from active firefights to field hospitals within the vital golden hour, ensuring a staggering 90% survival rate for critically wounded troops. Yet, the Chinook's British legacy is also stained by administrative disaster. The early 2001 HC-3 Special Forces procurement program suffered a catastrophic software certification failure. This technical blunder grounded 8 brand new aircraft for 8 agonizing years in climate-controlled storage, costing British taxpayers a staggering £422 million for idle machines. Today, a modern fleet of 60 Chinooks across 6 advanced marks continues to provide the irreplaceable, heavy-lifting logistical backbone for global British military deployments. Launched in 1980, the Westland W30 was a bold, highly ambitious attempt to capture the lucrative commercial offshore oil and gas market. Based on proven Lynx components, this medium-lift helicopter was designed as a direct response to real commercial demand. However, the market gap proved far tighter than Westland's optimistic research predicted. British North Sea oil operators, the critical target customers, flatly rejected the W30, choosing instead the firmly established Sikorsky S-61 and S-76 airframes due to their impeccable multi-year reliability records. Desperate for sales, Westland secured a lifeline by selling 21 units to the Indian Air Force, providing the bulk of the meagre 41 airframes ever built before production collapsed in 1988. This commercial failure triggered a profound national crisis. The resulting financial hemorrhage precipitated the infamous Westland Affair of 1985 and 1986, a bitter political scandal that tore through Margaret Thatcher's cabinet and led to the dramatic resignation of Defence Secretary Michael Heseltine. The ill-fated W-30 itself became a mere footnote, an engineering casualty whose market failure exposed deep, systemic fractures within Britain's defence industrial policy and forever altered domestic aerospace manufacturing. Entering Royal Navy service in 2000, the three-engine AW101. Merlin represents the absolute pinnacle of technological sophistication in British rotary wing history. It is also the most eye-wateringly expensive. The initial HM1 procurement programme ballooned to a staggering £22 billion, plagued by severe developmental overruns that delayed its deployment. The subsequent HM2 digital upgrade consumed another full decade and millions in unbudgeted funds. 66 Merlins were built for British service, split between advanced anti-submarine warfare and rugged commando assault roles. The heavily armoured HC-3 and HC-4 variants currently operate as the elite aerial vanguard for 846 Naval Air Squadron, moving troops into hostile territory. Meanwhile, specially configured search and rescue Merlins replaced the iconic Sea King HAR.3 starting in 2013. However, this transition came with a controversial twist. A political privatisation decision handed these life-saving missions over to Bristow Helicopters under a civilian contract. This historic shift effectively ended the heroic, continuous military search and rescue commitment that British aircrews had proudly maintained since 1941, transferring the ultimate responsibility of coastal rescue from active military personnel to a commercial corporation. Entering service in 2015, the AW159. Wildcat is a high-tech combat aircraft and the direct, digital descendant of the legendary Westland Lynx. Born from the ambitious Future Lynx program launched in 2002, 62 of these advanced multi-role machines were constructed, split between the Army's AH.1 and the Royal Navy's HMA.2 variants. The Naval Wildcat is a fierce maritime hunter. It carries a deadly arsenal including Martlet lightweight multi-role missiles, Sea Venom anti-surface missiles, and Stingray torpedoes for subsurface engagements. The platform proved its immense real-world lethality during a tense 2020 operational deployment to the volatile Strait of Hormuz. Operating from the deck of HMS Montrose, Wildcat crews provided critical airborne surveillance and direct tactical support for elite boarding parties, successfully deterring aggressive Iranian fast attack craft that were threatening vital British commercial merchant shipping. Yet, at just 62 total aircraft across both military branches, the compact Wildcat fleet represents a dramatic numerical contraction of British frontline strength. It stands as a stark symbol of the aggressive fleet downsizing and strict defence budget compressions that have shaped the nation's military reality over the last 5 decades. The WAH-64 Apache entered Army Air Corps service in 2001, providing Great Britain with a dedicated, terrifyingly lethal attack helicopter. 50 of these advanced tank killers were built under license from Boeing by Augusta Westland, uniquely customized with powerful, British-made Rolls-Royce RTM 322 turboshaft engines. The Apache quickly became an indispensable shield for ground forces in the hostile skies of Afghanistan's Helmand province from 2006 to 2014. WAH-64 crews flew over 20,000 intensive operational hours, delivering devastating, precision close air support during fierce combat engagements. However, a major shift in industrial strategy is currently underway. The aging WAH-64D models are being entirely replaced by the state-of-the-art Boeing AH-64E Guardian under a direct purchase agreement with the United States. This marks a significant departure from past policy. The new fleet is not a locally manufactured or licensed derivative, but an off-the-shelf American aircraft featuring minor British modifications. Consequently, Britain's premier attack helicopter for the 2030s will be manufactured far from British shores in Mesa, Arizona. While the legendary Rolls-Royce engine legacy remains part of the story, the iconic British-assembled airframe has been permanently left behind.